Having wrist pain and calisthenic goals, it sucks. You become significantly limited by what you can and can't do. What we're going to cover in today's video is my go-to routine for keeping your wrists mobile, healthy, and hopefully pain-free. Before we get into the actual routine, let's talk about a few issues that you can potentially run into the wrist, or you might have already run into with the wrist. With the wrist in calisthenics, we're almost going to be exclusively loading into extension. So movements like the handstand push-up, and planche are going to require different degrees of extension, placing various loads on the wrist. In my experience, we're typically going to run into one of three issues with the wrist. Those are going to be de Quervain's tenosynovitis, carpal tunnel syndrome, or forearm splints. The first one is forearm splints. This is going to show up along the bone or muscle. You're not going to experience pain during the movement, but when you relax, that's when you'll feel a sharp pain. This is typically said to be due to an imbalance of the forearm muscles, the forearm flexors being stronger than the extensors. If I have an athlete experiencing this, I like to program something like rice buckets or wrist curls. Next, we have de Quervain's tenosynovitis. This is going to be overuse of the thumb side of the wrist, resulting in inflammation of two muscles. Those muscles are going to be the abductor pollicis longus and the extensor pollicis brevis. A simple test you can do to help point you in the right direction of a diagnosis of this is called Finkelstein's test, where we make a fist with our thumb inside the fist and ulnar deviate or pull our pinky towards our wrist. If this hurts, it can help point you in the right direction with this. Lastly, we have carpal tunnel syndrome. This is going to be overuse of the flexor muscles of the wrist, resulting in inflammation of a band of tissue around your wrist called the flexor retinaculum. You can end up with numbness, tingling, or even weakness in the hands. A simple test you can try is called Phalen's maneuver, where we compress the back of the wrist together, fingers touching. You get to hang out here for 1 to 2 minutes, and if this reproduces pain in the wrist or cause numbness or tingling in the fingers, this can point us in the direction of carpal tunnel syndrome. I say point us in the right direction because if we look at this particular study they forced me to read in school, it shows that this test is fairly sensitive and specific. Sensitivity, guys, think an airport metal detector. It's gonna pick up all sorts of metal, maybe not specific to guns, so then we gotta do more specific tests, like where they pull you out of line and search your bag. So the same thing applies here. Also, keep in mind, this information is strictly intended for informational and educational purposes and not medical advice. But if you guys think you've ended up with one of these, please, by all means, seek out medical advice, but why would you guys listen to me?
Fine, do whatever you like. What would I know? I'm just a doctor.
Now on to the actual wrist stretches. And the best part about working the wrist is at some capacity you can work it every single day. Now for all of these variations, if you find it uncomfortable to have your knees directly on the floor, you can have a softer object underneath it. Same thing goes for your hands. I typically like to have a little support for my hands as opposed to having them on the hard gym floor. For all of these, I like working in the 10 to 15 rep range simply because the wrists have poor blood supply. This first one's gonna work wrist extension. The setup for all of these is gonna be the same. We want the hands flat on the floor. I like to think about splaying the fingers apart. And we want the hands at roughly a shoulder width distance. We also want to make sure the elbows stay locked out. Outwardly, it may look like I'm just rocking forward and rocking back, but there's a little more finer details going on here. As I'm rocking forward, I'm actually thinking about extending or pulling my wrist off the floor, even though my wrist's not lifting off the floor. This is activating my extensor muscles as I come forward. Likewise, on the way back to the starting position, I think about clawing my fingers into the floor. This activates and works my forearm flexor muscles more. This next one's also going to work wrist extension, but due to the nature of the hand position, it's going to focus on the wrist flexors this time with wrist extension. For the setup, we're going to externally rotate the hands so the fingers are pointing towards us. Now, keep in mind with this hand position, we're going to be very limited in the range of motion as we move in and out of this stretch. So it's going to be a very minimal motion that's occurring. Just like the last one, as I rock back, I want to think about pulling my wrist to my forearm to activate those forearm extensors. Then as I return back to the starting position, I want to think about clawing my fingers into the ground to once again activate or feel those wrist flexors. The next one's going to work wrist flexion. For the setup, we want to place the back of the hand on the floor. And keep in mind, this is an extremely vulnerable position. A lot of people are going to find this position extremely uncomfortable. Two ways you can make it more manageable at first are placing the hand on a slight incline or a soft pad underneath your hand as a way to slowly and safely build up tolerance to this position. Just like the previous exercise, we're gonna start every single rep with a locked out elbow, and just like the last movement, due to the position of the wrist, there's gonna be very minimal back and forth that you're actually gonna experience. But with that said, as I rock back, I think about pulling my fingers towards my forearm to activate those forearm flexors, and then as I return to the starting position, I think about pushing the back of my hand into the floor to activate or work those forearm extensor muscles. Lastly, we have wrist peels, whereas the previous exercises worked mainly the muscles on the front and back side of the forearm. You're gonna feel this one more at the base of the wrist and even into the palm of the hand. This one's actually my favorite out of the four that we've covered. I picked up this one from Matt Bernstein a few years ago when I was up at Boulder Movement Collective. For the setup on this one, this is the only movement we're gonna be doing one side at a time. You're gonna wanna externally rotate your hand so your fingertips are pointing towards your thigh. Then I like to tell people to simultaneously think about breaking at their elbow and peeling the base of their hand off the floor at the same time. Continue to peel your palm off the floor until you reach the base of your fingertips, or I like to tell a lot of people, their calluses. Hands down, the most common error is gonna be bending or breaking at the elbow. That bend or break is gonna take tension off the muscles and joints, simply making the stretch less effective. The next common error is gonna be going too fast. This isn't a CrossFit workout. The last one's gonna be specific to the wrist peels, and that's gonna be peeling too much of your hand off the floor, taking tension off of those forearm flexors, making the stretch less effective. That's all I've got on the wrists, and please, please, please guys, take care of your wrists. They are incredibly important, especially if you're looking to achieve those calisthenic-based goals. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Also make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos, and I'll see you guys next week.